Welcome back to Kumba Hineni, a podcast on intersectionality, more than just skin deep. I'm your host, Enzi. And this week, y'all, I wanted to chat a little bit about some reflections that I've had since learning that I'm autistic. It's been a little over a year since first discovering that. And one of the questions that you all asked me was, what were some of the traits that came up that notified me or that allowed me to notice that I was autistic? And so I wanted to chat a little bit about that with you all, as well as go over some of my reflections over the past year, some of the joys and accomplishments that I would attribute to learning that I'm autistic. So, all right, y'all, let's get it going. So, some of you all know, some don't, but in January of 2021, I had this privilege and honor to be an Access to Power Fellow with Join for Justice. And this was a new fellowship that in part was about to become virtual simply because of the ongoing pandemic. And so one just naming that the pandemic allowed for a space of disabled Jewish organizers to come across the country to be able to learn and become better organizers together. So I just wanted to say that because that was very, very important. Another thing that I want to bring up as well was I had a major meltdown right before this time, and I couldn't really name what was happening, but it happened while I was on the phone with my therapist. And one of the things my therapist said after apologizing and crying because I couldn't control myself was, I think I said I shouldn't have done that. And she just looked at me and said, well, didn't look at me. We were on the phone. But she just said that, was it really pointless? Do you feel better? And I said, yeah, I feel better. So as I went in, so this was in the back of my mind, right? So early January, I was a part of this fellowship, like I said, and I realized that as people were talking about what their needs was and what their sensory issues were, I realized that I noticed myself in them and in their needs, particularly with other trans autistic folks of color. And really, I want to also name that growing up, I did not notice or did not know if I had any friends who were autistic or not. And that clouded my understanding of autism for such a very long time, particularly as a person who's worked in mental health services, who's worked in many different fields. I thought I knew what autism was, and boy, I was extremely wrong. And I'm glad that I learned at a time that I learned. So, as I began to realize this, as peers started to talk, I started to study. It's what I do when I get interested in something. I study a lot. So, as with many things in my life, I found myself hyper-focused, watching YouTube videos on adults finding out that they were autistic. I noticed two of several things, but one of the things that I noticed were people who were socialized as women began to tell their stories and experiences. In these videos, conversations focus on the quote-unquote female traits of autism, and I will be honest, I struggled with this question of where do I fit? I believe that gender is socially constructed, and gender norms, even when it comes to autistic adults, are completely arbitrary. One of the aspects about autism is the deficits that they call deficits, but those categories are particularly in social norms. And so what I want to say about the things that we label as autistic traits in females, I don't think they're really gender-based at all. I think they're based upon what types of norms society puts on you. We know that there are populations of folks who are more likely to be to get a diagnosis in a much easier way because of the traditional traits, and the way we talk about the symptoms is really about a particular, in some ways kind of funny, but particular rigid character of what it means to be autistic. And that is interesting, right? Because it's called Autism Spectrum disorder, and what happens oftentimes is people think of a spectrum the way we talk about the gender spectrum, or the way that we talk about beginning and the end. But that's not really what a spectrum means when it's talking about the autism spectrum. It's saying that there's a spectrum of traits that we all hold. But it's a spectrum of them. It's a lot of them, right? So it's like we think about the color wheel and how the spectrums are in those ways. But red is still red. There's just different... red just shows up differently in different aspects of the color wheel. And that was something that I've been processing a lot. So the other thing that I began to notice, though, was that much of who I am is partially because of my autism, right? So the more I learned about special interests, I began to realize that after I first learned about being trans issues, it completely became one of my special interests. The same with becoming Jewish. Particularly, I remember while becoming Jewish, being in conversations and meetings with my therapist about just curious and asking about different things and thinking about, like, realizing that my therapist, I didn't know it until after, was a Jew of color. But I remember spending hours and hours and actually not sleeping, being up on myjewishlearning.com and just trying to research and study and learn as much as I could about this. And this was before I realized that I was even falling in love with Judaism. And as I look back at it, I just kind of smile because I realized that much of my autism has led me to the person I am today, right? This person who I absolutely love and enjoy. And that is extremely a fun thing for me. You know, a lot of times it's easy to look back and say, oh, I can see how these jobs I love could have been impacted by my autism. I could see where I wasn't following the quote-unquote social norms. And at those same times, I can see that those people were actually the problem. And in many ways, I actually realized that folks who are not able to be honest, who are willing to lie, to keep their jobs in place. And, you know, good on you if that's what you're able to do, because I've never been able to lie, and I'm not able to do that, even if it was to save my life. And yet I know people do it on a regular basis. And learning that I'm autistic helped a lot. It helped me shake a little bit of this problem that I often come up with, that I'm not enough. Because that's not true, and it has never actually been true. Ever. And yet it really becomes easy to feel that way, because mediocrity is a real thing, but also privilege is really huge as well. And so people, right, whether it's neurotypical people, whether it's cis people, right, whether it's white assimilated folks who are in power will fight till the death to give that power up. And I really mean that. And I've been observing that. I've seen how folks will quickly lie. Intentionally, knowing that they're not telling the truth, because it's a little white lie, and it's okay. It's not going to hurt anyone. But it does normally hurt people. Because one of the fascinating pieces, and I'm not going to, don't want to go too much in this, but one of the things that is a reality is oftentimes we are engaging in conversations with people assuming that they're being honest. And so what I do want to name real quickly for non-autistic folks who are listening, also known as allistic folks, or neurotypical folks in general, I want to start off by saying this, particularly if you are in a hiring position or a supervisor. Folks are going to start becoming more and more aware of what it means to ask for accommodations, right? And one of the things that I know happens, doesn't just happen to me, it happens a lot of times actually, when folks are asking for sensory-related accommodations. It is oftentimes denied. And that's illegal, actually. So that's why I'm saying that it's illegal, so y'all know that you can't do that. But also naming that what is oftentimes banking on is that some of us are unaware of what's happening, right? Some of us are coming and asking for different resources, and we're not getting them. And for me, the reason I'm bringing this up is because for me, learning that I was autistic was like, oh, that's it. That makes perfect sense, because how in the world can I think that I'm being honest and around people who I'm with 24/7, because this was before the pandemic, who actually it started to all dawn. It makes sense, right? Like, I realized that, oh, right, I engaged with colleagues and coworkers who did not care one bit about their clients, who talked crap on their clients all the time. So why wasn't I smart enough to realize that they could do the same thing about me? And they have, and they did, and they will probably continue to. And here's the thing that I want to say. And this is the piece about all of it, actually, is learning that that's not me, right? That issue around trying to figure out am I being honest or not, that's a neurotypical thing. I've always been a person to say exactly what I need, exactly what I'm thinking. I don't really hold back. In fact, that's gotten me in trouble a lot of times. And yeah, it is a struggle. I told a friend recently, I don't remember when, that we cannot lose hope just because other people are not honest. And one of the things that was really easy for me to do this year was to say and assume that folks were lying first, and then potentially maybe being honest. But then I realized that's not really a great way to move forward, one. But two, that's not on me, right? If someone wants to be deceptive, mischievous, that's not up to me. You know, for those of you who may have seen Encanto, and I think next episode I might do a little longer review of Encanto, but when I talk about this, I think about that scene in Encanto when Tio Bruno, right? When Bruno looks at Maribel and says, "Maribel, you're not listening. It's not up to your sister, it's up to you." And I say it to say this, is it's not up to those around me who are, well, actually it is. It is up to folks, to be honest. And at the same time, that freedom, that liberation that comes from knowing that I do what I can to survive, but also knowing that I'm honest, as well as knowing that I am an open book. I don't hide very much. It's really easy. You can ask me. I tend to answer all questions when people are chatting with me. If I get an email, I oftentimes would come, if it's in an office, and speak with the person to make sure I'm understanding exactly what's going on. And that's been important. As well as being mindful that some of my struggles are about how we talk about leadership. And I'm not going to, these are topics that will come up in different times, right? But I will name the frustration that happens in leader spaces where we talk a lot about nonverbal commentary, right? We talk a lot about nonverbal cues. And so if we are going to be, particularly those of us who are in progressive spaces, right? Those of us who are in progressive social justice spaces, what does it look like as we're in these spaces, as well as how do we make space for neurodivergent folks, right? For actually autistic folks, what do we do? How do we allow for our reality in the spaces that we're in, right? How do we shift culture from folks where, for example, sometimes I have auditory processing. I do have auditory processing issues, right? And so sometimes a person will tell a joke. I don't hear the joke, so I ask, "What did you say?" And oftentimes the response is, "Oh, don't worry about it. It wasn't a big deal." That may seem so tiny and so small, but really, people really get tired of hearing jokes that no one actually understands what's been half said. And I want to name that because it takes 2 seconds to respond and say, "This is what I said." Instead, oftentimes, neurodivergent folks or folks with any type of auditory processing delays walk around thinking y'all ain't funny at all because we don't hear the jokes. And so I just really hope that as a group that we start paying a little bit more attention to how we show up in spaces. And this is speaking for myself as well, because I'm constantly learning and constantly trying to find different ways to exist in the world, and we'll continue to find out what that is. So with all of that, again, thank you so much for listening to Kumba Hineni, a podcast with intersectionality more than just skin deep. I'll chat with y'all next time. Kumba Hineni, a podcast on intersectionality more than just skin deep, is a part of the Jew Folk Podcast Network, a product of Jew Folk Inc. You can email the show at podcast@tcjewfolk.com. For more information, go to tcjewfolk.com/podcast.